So I was struck by the idea of cartography too, with like you write about everything's on Google Earth now. It's like I was joking with a friend about this. Somebody now will give you physical directions, and you almost don't even listen, right? Because you're like, I'm just gonna GPS it anyway, right? And it's almost like quaint. It's like, oh, okay, And I know there are areas where physical directions do matter because not everything shows up and whatever, but it's just such like a lost art, and people, our kids, our students age, they don't know about Thomas Brothers maps and all of that stuff. So I just wonder about like about cartography and how you kind of felt like maybe it's like a lost art, but also what it says to you in 2023.
Yeah. So for me, that essay is set when I first leave California to move to Nebraska. And it was the first time, again, as sort of a working class kid, we didn't travel growing up. You didn't really leave your county, let alone your state, let alone the country. And so I remember just being fascinated by seeing the landscape change and being overwhelmed by seeing different sort of, geological structures and different plant and animal life. And then when I got to Nebraska, it was just so different. And I was immersed in this new way of living and being and reacting to the land and to the folks in the community there. Map making I find to be a fascinating art form, a fascinating form of control and coercion, like you talked about before, because maps are completely arbitrary. Early mapping and map making, could shape the way that a traveler viewed the landscape based on the natural resources that they advertised, based on the scale, based on the landmarks that a map maker or cartographer thought was important. And so there's a lot of sort of manipulation and control and artistry, of course, in those early maps. But I do think it's something interesting to think about in 2023, right? As our national landscape gets rewritten by those in power, as certain landmarks are deemed important or unimportant based on whoever gets to decide, as ways of knowing and being in place are washed over by people who decide that certain communities don't matter. And so I think there's a lot to be said for cartography and the ways that we write a nation or a landscape today. And the other thing I'll say about cartography or being in place or immersing yourself in place is I find it sad and sort of a lost art, like you said, that we can't give, I guess, natural direction anymore. That we often will say, "Oh, turn at the McDonald's." Well, the McDonald's might not be there in 6 months. And we used to say, "Oh, you turn at this tree. You turn at the willow tree, and the willow tree will look like this in the spring. It'll look like this in the summer." And we don't know that anymore. And most people can't go to a place and point out the species that have been there. They can't name a tree or name a plant or name a certain rock formation. And that's how we used to know place, and that's how we used to navigate ourselves in the world. And now we couldn't do that. We're sort of lost and disconnected from nature in that way.
Are you like a member of any cartography societies or anything now? Or?
No, but that would be very cool. I'd be very interested.
This is like the direct opposite of nature. Like it's very much technology, but I just think of the same idea, like this idea of like the lost art. I remember, I don't know, 2005-ish or something, maybe before that even. My dad was telling me about, I think it's like biography.com. It's a very generic. And he was just like, yeah, they have biographies of so many people. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And it was such an important idea at the time. And then Wikipedia just came in and just, I mean, Wikipedia is so interesting to me. I mean, who's writing that article on, some no-name baseball player in his 2019 season? You know what I mean? So, but just the idea of like, it was so, cool and kind of like artisanal, if you will.
Yeah.
And now, and again, I love Wikipedia, but it's just like, that's just taking over everything. Right. It's like a mom and pop grocery store versus, Walmart everywhere.
Right.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that cartography. Okay. So yeah, I think about like, meetup.com. I'm sure there's cartography groups and all that. Look into it. There's definitely a double meaning that you excavate, pardon the pun, so well with Descendant is another piece. It's a lot of it's about your grandfather and his history in the mines and more so your family's history in the mines, even going back to England, right? Is that perhaps maybe Cornwall or Wales? you happen
I
to
don't
know?
remember. I'd have to
Yeah.
ask my mother and the keeper of the family lore. Yeah.
Yeah. My limited knowledge, I think of mines, I think of like Cornwall area, but obviously, descendant, and I like you obviously traffic in words and you're so good with them. I just love etymology, and you made me think of like, wow, obviously descending, going down, as well as, is the family line getting worse or better? Or how do you even judge that? And obviously descendant, like as an ancestor. A lot about, he worked the mines in horrible conditions and he had to literally contort his body. You talked earlier about the pain that comes with blue collar work, and a lot of that came out in his rage and his pain and in drinking. What connections do you feel to those who worked in the mines? I mean, you work with words, you work more on the white collar side, but I guess how have your grandfather, maybe particularly, or anyone in general in your family, just really kind of shaped you through that blue collar tough work?
Yeah. So I very much consider myself to be, I guess, the storyteller of those stories that get lost or don't get acknowledged.
Uh-huh.
When I was growing up, everyone around me, their bodies hurt this all
Yeah.
the time, and their spirits hurt and their souls hurt. With my grandfather in particular, in that essay I write about, he started working the mines when he was very young. When he quit school to go to work in the mines, and he
Mm-hmm.
basically grew up underground. He grew up
Jeez.
in the dark, which I can't even imagine. I know nothing of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with my father, my uncles. Everyone did manual labor. Their bodies were so marked by that work. And I think it feeds right into what I discuss in the essay, which is my family's legacy and history with addiction, right? Because if the reality that is bodily and spiritual pain, right? And sort of unrelenting work, like that is your entire life. From the moment that you can work until the moment that you die, you do work. Nobody retired. Nobody had
Mm-hmm.
medical leave. You just worked.
Mm.
And I think that it's only natural that folks would turn to alcohol and drugs for some sense of escape. And so that family legacy, not only of physical bodily labor and pain, but also of addiction, is one that's very much run through all the sort of limbs of my family tree. Most of my family members suffer very much from addiction and have their entire lives, and it's very hard to write about, hard to be part of. And something that I don't think that anyone that grows up in that environment is really sort of free from. So I talk in that essay about this sort of specter of darkness that I feel sometimes if I drink too much, right? I can kind of feel something that
Mm.
I think is akin to what my grandfather probably felt, just like a familial darkness, and a haunting sort of legacy. And it's why I'm quite cautious about drinking. It's why I'm
Mm.
cautious about what I put into my body. But you can't escape it. It doesn't matter if you choose to drink or not. You can't escape
Mm.
that sort of marrow kind of knowing that
Mm.
extends from generation to generation.
I wonder how you kind of balance it all or weigh it all. Like, you write about how your grandmother was very much was scared of his violent moods, right? And
Yeah.
perhaps physical
Mhm.
violence.
Yes.
I mean, but you talk about, I have no idea what it is to live underground all the time, to drop out of school, and just to work for pain. I wonder how that does that help humanize him? Is it still, especially when it comes to like things that are pretty reprehensible, like domestic violence?
Yeah. My goal with nonfiction is always to, I think, complicate humanity, right? It's way too easy to cast a hero and a villain. Like that's not, real. It's not interesting. It's not what I
No.
want to read about. So for me, it's, I want to understand my grandmother, what she went through, why she stayed. I want to understand my grandfather. Who was he at one point? How did he change? What versions of himself did he lose along the way?
Mm.
I want to understand my siblings, my biological siblings and my adopted siblings, all of whom suffer from addiction in various forms, and have some abusive and violent histories themselves. And so it's always about understanding and empathy are different, right? And
Mm.
understanding or empathy and excusing behavior is different. I never want to rationalize violence. I never want to rationalize domestic violence or sexual abuse, but I want to understand the various circumstances surrounding it and to create a complicated portrayal of it, because I don't think we get enough of those really nuanced portrayals of violence, addiction,
Mm.
sexual assault and abuse. Yeah.
Right. one of the pieces is called Carve. And you just talked about it, like the sometimes literal imprints from violence, but the imprints, the traumas that come with violence in the family, outside the family, with assault, with addiction, and that piece ends with there's maybe one other piece that's like second person, and it's almost like a call to action, or almost like commanding. I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's like, do not crack to the marrow. Again, if we're talking about like carving and bones and fossils, and the narwhal is mentioned, something, and it's so beautifully poetic. It's something about like, be slick with oil so you can't be held down. You were just talking about like not really judging and complicating things. I wonder if you feel like that's like normal, if that's like a departure from your normal, kind of almost like giving advice, or do you know what I mean? Like using second person rather than stating something, and the reader will do with it what he or she may.
Yeah, so Carve is sort of an interesting essay. I'm really interested in scrimshaw.
Yeah.
Now that I live in sort of New England, there's scrimshaw shops everywhere, and I find scrimshaw to be such a strange art form because you're carving into bone, right? You're making art by scarring the bones of something that is no longer living because it's been hunted.
Right.
And I thought the metaphor, of course, fit quite well with domestic violence or sexual assault. But that departure at the end, it's I think it's a move that a lot of nonfiction writers use to get some distance, right? It allows you to move to the second person to get some distance when talking about my personal experiences with domestic violence and sexual assault, my family's experiences. But I also wanted to tie my experiences again to this art form of scrimshaw, so it becomes a command for both the scrimshaw artist, and also the reader or someone who's experienced sexual assault or domestic violence themselves.
Right. That, like, so that was like I said, so poetic, just the idea of using that oil in different ways and using it to heal. There's just a lot going on there for sure. The there are a lot of themes that come out throughout. We talked about already the idea of home and the evolving idea of what home is. Nostalgia comes up a lot. You even talk about the history of the word, break it down. It was kind of like, it was kind of constructed, right, by I want to say like Finnish or Swedish scientist, the word nostalgia.
Yeah, I was a graduate student who posited that word in his thesis. Yeah.
So it's technically Greek, right? But it comes from two Greek words.
Yeah.
One of your lines about home is, quote, only home because it'll be gone one day, right? And there's so much about, like we talk about, evolving homes and coming home to what was, where you grew up in the Central Coast area of California. And because of climate change, because of just life, things are different. Things aren't there anymore. Things are temporal. And I feel like I'm so interested in this word that I would steer the conversation here anyway, but you definitely talk about it. Like, then it's almost this idea of like missing something you never had. I wonder if you're familiar with the Portuguese term. That is nostalgia. And I'm looking here to make sure I get my pronunciation correct here. Nostalgia. It's a Portuguese term that it's like a nostalgia for something you've never experienced. But it's saudade, Saudade.
Oh, yes, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's an emotional state of melancholic or profoundly nostalgic longing for a beloved yet absent something or someone.
Right.
So I guess just in general, again, that's why I love talking about saudade and this idea of a word that really doesn't have a translation in English, right? But what is it to be nostalgic for a home, especially when you talked about that you are not sure that you've always wanted to be in a certain place, and nostalgic for a time and for a place that maybe don't exist and won't exist. It's a natural, concept. How do you kind of see nostalgia?
I'm fascinated with nostalgia, especially the ways that it's been used recently to serve capitalism, right? So we're seeing all these advertisements of, oh, things were so great back then, let me sell you a product. Oh, things were so great back then, let me reboot this TV show.
Yeah.
So I've always been fascinated with that, but more fascinating, I think, is that history that you talked about, which is that when nostalgia was first coined or created, it was seen as a mental illness. It was something that
Yeah.
is very dangerous. It had emotional and physical symptoms. It could cause death even. And it was seen as something that impacted soldiers. So soldiers, Swiss soldiers in particular, would be traveling and engaging in battle. And if soldiers were homesick, it was seen as dangerous, and it could spread throughout the fleet and infect everybody. And so it was very, very discouraged. And that dark sort of undercurrent compared with the rosy view of nostalgia that we have now, I find really fascinating. And what I write about in the book is that nostalgia for me has always been a really lovely and like delightfully confusing feeling. I can remember being a kid and being like sad on Christmas morning that Christmas was in the process of being over. I don't think a lot of 5-year-olds are thinking that, but like I would be opening presents being like, oh, I'm so sad that this wonderful Christmas is dying. Like, and that's how I viewed a lot of things. Of things are only beautiful because they're going to leave, and something is only meaningful because it's going to end. And so I'm really interested in that kind of interplay of time and beginnings and endings. And nostalgia, especially for place. I write a lot in the collection about missing places that are no longer in existence because of climate change or because of urbanization or development, missing people that are gone because you're not in touch with them anymore, because they've passed, or because they've changed, including yourself, right? Missing versions of yourself that you are no longer. And I write a lot about wanting to get back to earlier versions of myself before the world made me so jaded, I suppose. So I wanted to get back to those early versions. Yeah. And so for me, nostalgia is that wonderful, complicated, confusing feeling that I had as a kid and that I'm always trying to figure out as an adult.
One of the big catalysts for this whole podcast is the Bullet in the Brain story by Tobias Wolff.
Yes.
Right. Which ends with just a beautiful recollection of, the carelessness of carefree. That's what I'm looking for. The carefree days of childhood and all that. And yeah, you make such a great point. It's like, nostalgia is like, oh, when we were kids, we'd play until the lights came on, until mom called us for dinner. And like you said, in back in the day, it was dark. It was a mental illness. It was, we can't let it spread. You wrote about how like one of the Russian like commanders or whatever was basically like, if you guys keep this up, I'm going to bury one of you alive. Did he actually do that?
I don't know if he actually it was a threat that was carried out throughout. Yeah. Yeah.
A little different.
I was gonna say, like we talked earlier about Joan Didion and privilege, right? And with nostalgia, one of the things I think is so important to keep in mind is you have to be really privileged to say, oh, things were better back then, right? Because better for who gets to decide what better actually was? It's very easy to say things were better 50 years ago. They were only better for some folks, a very, very privileged group of folks. So that's something else I find so fascinating and like concerning about nostalgia is who gets to decide what is better and why are we so tempted to go back?
Yeah, I'm sure that has nothing to do with MAGA, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, yeah, I think if people say, oh, 50 years ago and times were so much more simple, we would just go to the pool. Well, even on the West Coast, they had pools where if you were Black, you can only go on certain days.
Well, and we're seeing a great unrolling of civil liberties right now, right? I'm thinking of all, yesterday the Supreme Court passing all sorts of things that are unrolling or going back in time and removing the civil liberties for large groups of people. Yeah.
To a supposedly better time, right?
Exactly.
In quotes. Oh my gosh. So you mentioned time, and I identify with a lot of this, the idea of, you talk about time, even this idea of like, oh, this Christmas present's so awesome, but it's done. And, Christmas is 364 days away, right? That kind of thing. And just the idea of you write about time and how you write about like that timepiece is somewhere in the Midwest that Jeff Bezos keeps care of. And this idea of like self-propelling clocks and how incredibly down to the second they are, right? Without much human interaction even. But the idea of the pendulum, you really talk about, I think in 1656, the pendulum was invented, and that like kind of like stopped time or changed time. You would figure like, oh, it'd be the opposite. You'd figure like that would make time more precise or whatever. How did the pendulum kind of just affect the way that we see time?
Yeah, so for me, I will preface this saying I'm completely biased. I dislike time. I dislike keeping. I dislike clocks. I've always seen time as an arbitrary sort of construct. It
Yeah.
stresses
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of people out.
So you're anti-time?
I'm anti-time. Yeah, no, time's terrible. Yeah, it's awful. The pendulum, right? I mean, for me, the image is this like sort of swinging to your death, like swinging over your head.
Well, the
It's
doomsday clock and all that you mentioned,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, the doomsday clock. And I write in the essay that you're referring to about, as a child, I didn't understand why our lives were sort of bound to the clock. And
Mm.
for my parents, of course, being sort of, they worked very long hours, 12-hour days.
Mm.
Time was of the essence. But for me as a kid, I wanted more time with my parents. I wanted more time to be together. And so time was, it was a scarce resource. There was never enough time. We were always sort of running out of time. And
Sorry,
that's,
can I cite the great Saved by the Bell
yeah,
reference there?
yeah.
Did you get the Saved by the Bell reference?
Oh no, I love Saved by the Bell. Don't
Remember Jessie Spano when she was on speed pills and stuff?
yeah,
There's
yeah, yeah,
never
yeah.
enough time.
It's
Never
true.
any time. It's so true.
And then she's saying, "I'm so excited," right? That's
Exactly.
exactly
You
it.
kind of nailed it too, by the way. But sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I just think it's that fear that I had as a child of not having enough time, or of missing out on the timed test, or not doing things properly, and not following the time. It's something that carries with us into adulthood, right? We
Yeah.
live a lot of our lives based on, when you're this old, you should do this, and then you should do that.
Mm.
And we do have that doomsday clock, in terms of climate change, in terms of social and political chaos and unrest that we're experiencing right now. That is always sort of ticking in the background for us. And so those childhood fears of time running out, I think, are adult fears of time running out as well.
I don't think that either of us, or probably any of us, could make an objective, call on this. But do you see like the idea of the fascination with time? Do you see it as like morbid or just like natural?
I think it's natural. I mean, we mark our understanding of humanity in terms of
I'm sorry to
time.
interrupt. I mean, is it pretty directly linked to mortality? I mean, is that pretty safe to
Yeah,
say?
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
We want to make the most of our lives. We want to make something meaningful of our lives, but we often are unable to do that because we're so fixated, I think, on time.
Right. Makes us freeze up, right? And maybe not do anything. Yeah, that was very interesting. I like I said, it resonated a lot with me, just especially as a kid, and just like the literal ticking of some of those old school grandfather clocks, and you describe how digital is different for you, but you still don't like it, and just the ways just time goes. And I was so interested in like Arizona, it's kind of on daylight savings time, and you cite when these scientists tried to keep time in the air, and that kind of threw it into chaos. And yeah, I agree. I'm not going to say I'm anti-time, but I'm more anti-time now than I was 20 years.
Excellent.
Good. There's a lot about cycles, cycles of violence, cycles of trauma, cycles of closeness, families being close knit. You write about some of the students you had who were scary, and you do feel for them also. Maybe veterans and people who had seen a lot. You write about the one student who really seemed to be trying to put the past behind them, but also, the demons came out. The terrible story about the Virginia Tech shooter, and one of your colleagues had worked, or maybe one of your professors had worked there. There's a lot about violence and hunting, and when you were hunting, I was definitely struck by the idea of you using the gun for like a class assignment, right? And just like the preening is not the word, just kind of like the guffawing men, just like the Antonia Nelson, like in the land of men, just being surrounded by men, and do this and do that. And it wasn't something that you loved, of course. Cycles. Do you feel like in writing about these cycles of violence, of addiction, of traumas, do you feel like there's some exorcism, some catharsis that came to you just by kind of naming them?
I like that question. I always say, as a nonfiction writer, I never feel like a catharsis, or like a release, or like like it's therapy or anything like that. But I do feel like it helps me to make sense of the chaos, right? And so when you have all of these cycles of violence and addiction, they can very quickly become tangled, and it's hard to see your way out of it, especially if that's your familial experience or legacy. So in writing it and trying to to make a story out of it on the page. Sometimes a simplified story or just one part of the story. I do think that I can get some clarity on that. I never think of these cycles, they don't have an end. The essay has an end, but often my essays end in ambiguity or an image. But yeah, it does. It helps me to make sense of coming from those narratives or from those legacies.
Yeah. The book begins and ends with your relationship with your father, and just like he's his parents' son, your father's daughter. The beautiful idea of the digging sites to start the book, and him sprinkling all the things there. And then as the book goes on, there are pieces about aging, which of course obviously is natural. There's the one piece about I don't honestly know fully what a rock tumbler is. Is it polishing stones? Is it putting a complete stone together from pieces?
Well, you're missing out on a rock tumbler.
I know.
It's a bag. You take a bag of sort of ugly or uninteresting rocks and you throw them in your tumbler with some chemicals, and it polishes them to shine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good childhood experiment. Yeah.
Right. So in that piece, there's, it's cool about your dad really with a flourish would bring out this cooking. He was from his mom, especially, ideas of making something out of nothing. And, in the same way with these stones, you break it down about, I don't know how to pronounce it. Pumice,
yeah.
Right. Pumice, which is like, man, pumice is like the redheaded stepchild of rocks, right? It's just not really good looking. And it's like, there's nothing to be really had with it other than to scrape the bottom of your feet kind of thing. And just, the different stones and what they represent, and really interesting and cool connections. But, you write about your father throughout the book, just always working. You've talked about that. And there was, I got to assume, was a real beautiful time where after he was able to retire, there was a calm. I mean, I know anybody being a parent or just an adult, like life is chaotic when you're working, and, you can't sit down and relax. And sometimes your speech is a little bit more forced and you're a little bit, more on edge. And it does seem like before the unfortunate cancer diagnosis, he did have a time where he was a little bit more at ease. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, a bit. Yeah.
So you were able to see him in a different light. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say I wrote, my father, as you said, plays a really large role in the collection. He's the anchoring beginning and end. He threads throughout many of the essays. And the reason I wrote the book and so many essays about him is because during, again, I wrote this during the early months of the COVID pandemic. I was very worried for his health. I was unable to get back to see him. And he was increasingly frustrating. My father was a wonderful father and a really complicated man. And so the older that I got, we started to disagree on most things, socially, politically, environmentally. And I was trying to reconcile, the father of my childhood with the man I was getting to know as an adult. And so a lot of these essays, again, will show the duality of, the man who will bring treasures home from his work site with a man who will, in one of the essays I say, he told me as an adult to be quiet and sent me to my room when I was in my 30s, right? And trying to understand gender dynamics.
Right.
But yes, we did have moments, and I write about them towards the end of the collection. We did have moments, especially after he was able to retire and have some release of that bodily and sort of spiritual pain, where we were able to connect. And I do mention in the collection, he was diagnosed with cancer while I was writing the collection. He passed away while I was doing the final edits for the collection, and his death really shaped the collection, my sense of home, my sense of time and impermanence, my sense of identity. And it really shaped the way I saw him. I mean, it's, you always say hindsight is 2020. It helped me to understand him a lot more. And it's a morbid thing to say, but I always say my father dying was the best thing for our relationship. It made me see my childhood so differently. It made me see the man so differently. And I know he would be very excited and happy with the way that he came out in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure that he had passed away. I'm so sorry to hear that. The book does leave it in the middle of his, it does seem that his health was rapidly deteriorating. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted, it's a writer's trick. I wanted the foreshadowing of his passing to be in the book, but I wanted him to be alive in the final
Right.
pages. Yeah.
Right. And you had mentioned about quiet, and there are many women, including your mom at times, kind of kind of like faceless women, not in a negative way, but like a lot of them, like in the family and surrounding family, that you write about something basically like when the women said stop, the men said quiet. And that really is just so telling, right? Just it says so much about those relationships. And the women are in one room kind of drowning their sorrows, whether it's literally in alcohol or just in each other, and talking and kind of cowering a bit, and the men kind of doing their own thing, which is very interesting. There's obviously a lot about gender dynamics and gender roles for sure. Kind of the women who love these men who were at times violent and misogynistic, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also a lot about the value of labor, right? Because
Hmm.
men's manual physical labor is often valued over a woman's invisible domestic labor. And so the
Sure.
fact that we value labor, what labor gets counted and what labor gets ignored.
That's for dang sure. Oh man, that's a very good point. In writing about so tough to not be able to see your father, your family as much, because of the pandemic, obviously is a big part of it. Which is still going on, which the only 3 years ago really started. It's just so amazing that you wrote about it so clearly, with a little bit of that time and that probably that perspective that came with the unfortunate passing of your father. The relationship with your father, as like so many of us, was evolving from the time the book starts to when he passed and even to today. But you're right that you're always the little girl, and there is, towards the very end of the book, there's a beautiful scene where you see him, I think, at the airport or the train station, and you're just in tears of happiness to see him, right?
Yeah.
What is it about nostalgia and our parents that is absolutely something we cannot separate and divorce?
I don't know. I don't parents, and I think there's, for me at least, it's the childhood self. It's that when my parents are there, I am me as an adult, and I am me as a child, and I am me as all the
Yeah.
versions in between. And there's something about that that juxtaposition, or that compression of time, perhaps,
Mhm.
that you exist in all those forms. Yeah, that
Mm.
brings it all back.
Makes me think of the Cisneros piece called 11,
Oh yes. Yeah.
right? Where it's like a Russian doll. You're 10. When you're 11, you're also 10 and you're 9. So you're also, your father's daughter at 14 and 12 and 10. And also, I can't think of the title. It's one of his essays, but Dagoberto Gil, the last piece when he sees his mother in the hospital is just like, it's so crushing. And I'm not going to do justice because of, the context in the previous part, but it's just like, ah, mom, like, oh, mom, like he finally is able to just talk to her on an adult level. And it's an unfortunate time. So I again want to express my condolences. Your father's, he's a character in a book, like he's fictional, but he's obviously a real person and had a huge beneficial impact on you. And the collection is, I started to write down themes and I think I stopped at 927. There's so much going on. It's such a book that has, I'm using this bad pun again, it's going to have such a shelf life, because there's a lot of things that are maybe temporal, as far as the pandemic, and 2020 is very specific, but they're very universal and timeless. So congratulations on so many individual pieces on their own, but that alchemy that really put them all together to come up with that finished product.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If you're so inclined, if you want to share what maybe you're working on for the future.
Yes, yeah. So the next sort of book that I'm working on is a craft book. It's a book about unlearning the ableist writing workshop and sort of creating and crafting a disabled writing practice. A lot of writing advice is geared towards abled writers, and it's not
Mm.
really advice that disabled writers can use. It's actually advice that if disabled writers use it, we risk injuring ourselves. We can't write every day. We can't type a certain number of words a day. Some of us can't type at all.
Mm.
And so it's a book about really rethinking the art of creative writing and the ways that we teach creative writing, and being able to implement and envision a disabled writing practice. And that'll be out with Sundress Publications.
All right. What a necessary addition to the canon, huh?
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. I think it's
Yeah.
important. I think it's something that we don't talk about as much as we need to.
Huh. Well, yeah, like Matthew Celestis with his craft book, which is so kind of mind-blowing. And I don't know, do you read Alice Wong, the disability advocate?
Oh, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
She
And
has,
Sonia Huber has a great new craft book out called Voice First, which touches on a
okay,
lot of different things, but disability especially. Yeah.
yeah, there's so many exciting pieces coming out. Congratulations on that one. I'm sorry, tell me again when that's coming out.
That'll be out in 2025 with Sundress Publications.
Sundress Publications. Where would obviously Barnes and Noble and Amazon, even if if need be, for sure they're up there. Where would you love us to get Halfway from Home and your other work?
I always recommend that folks buy straight from the publisher. So my publisher of Halfway from Home is Split Lip Press, which is a great indie publisher based out of Nebraska,
Yeah.
A place that I've called home, a place that I miss dearly. So I always recommend folks go straight to the publisher. It allows the publisher to keep producing great indie texts and then to be able to do things like travel with the books and support their authors.
Nice. And are you pretty easy to find, or do you want to be found online? Any contact or social media info?
I think every writer has to be found, has to be available online. So yeah, I've got a website, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Not cool enough for TikTok, but yeah, I'm in those other places.
I say the opposite. I think you're too cool for TikTok. There you go. Well, thank you so much. Congrats on the upcoming, and congrats on the award, and just a well-deserved award for Halfway from Home. Thanks for letting us get into the lab a little bit and hearing the rationale and the philosophy, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to join the ranks of some amazing writers that you've had on this show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.